Who were the over-the-mountain men? Why were they called that? Who were they? Where'd they come from? And what significant role did they play in history of these Appalachian Mountains? Now, this was when the country was young, back before it was a nation, back in the 1750s to 1770s, and people were looking for land. But there was none on the East Coast, so they had to go west into the Appalachian Mountains or beyond. Now, here's what the mountains look like. It was just an impenetrable wall with only passes in certain places. But this was a Native American land for thousands of years before anybody come in here trying to settle this country. And the area we're talking about is circled right here, the southern part of the Appalachians, the over-the-mountain men where they come from. But this is Native American land in them days. Now, the 13 colonies, some of these states is wanting to expand out because of the population. And you could see like Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina claimed their land all the way to Mississippi. But most of it was just vast unknown land, only known by the Native Americans. So they people was branching out, trying to find their own land, start their own families in this young country. Back in the days before it was the United States, the first people in here really was the long hunters. They explored this land, hunted it, trapped it, mixed with the Native Americans. At first they come in by themselves, and then they come in groups as they come into this wild country. Now, in 1775 of March, a guy called Richard Henderson made a deal with the Cherokee Indians at Watauga Shoals to buy 20 million acres from the Cherokee, which wasn't really theirs. It was much as less the Shawnee as it was theirs, out of Kentucky. But he made a deal with him and hired Daniel Boone to blaze a trail with his axemen, make the wilderness road into the dark and bloody ground of Kentucky. And here's what the road looked like and the places he settled back before the Revolutionary War, back in the early days. This is the places he got. And they did the same thing in Tennessee too. Come across these rugged mountains into these Tennessee valleys. Isolated people. But they come in here anyway. And they worked hard, trying to hack their way into a little clearing into this wilderness and these mountains and valleys. These little families. Some didn't survive either. Some didn't make it. But they lived in little places like this. Little old simple dwellings made out of the wood they cut down in these mountains. Even some bigger little farms starting out. But this is what they look like. Simple structures made out of rock chimneys. And inside of them, little fireplaces like this. But they lived hard. It was a hard life trying to make this life. And they had little forts they called, or blockhouses, where they protect themselves from the Native Americans that resented them being there. And they started these little communities between them, militias. So when they had trouble with the Native Americans or anything, they would send riders in between the communities and forts for help, all up and down this frontier. And they would come what they could to help each other out. Travel long distances too through these mountains. But that's the way it was back in them days. The militias. And they was always trying to defend their families, farms, and communities from the Native Americans that didn't want them being there. And I can't blame them, because this was their land and they didn't want it gone. But you can't stop history. You just can't stop it. And here's the state of Kentucky and Tennessee back in the old days, what it looked like on the frontier, trying to settle this wild country. Now, as hard as things was, in 1776, the Revolutionary War started. Tried to break their independence from England, the British. And it was a hard struggle for the patriots in them days. And they was losing the war too at times. You'd think they wasn't going to make it, but they survived. And here in the southern end of it, the British even tried on the frontier to turn the Native Americans against the settlers and the pioneers, turning against them for their favor. But they didn't really care about the Native Americans. They was just using them. And they would even, the territorial commander in Detroit for the British was paying for scalps for the frontier men. And all these people in these settlements paying for scalps. And they obliged them too. Now, the biggest trouble they had from the Cherokee was a guy called Chief Doublehead. He was a young man during the Revolutionary War, but he lasted even after the Revolutionary War. But anyway, Cornwallis took Charleston, and he come in to Charleston there and defeated the army of the Patriots. So he controlled that, and he was coming up from the south to go up towards New York. But on his left flank, there was a guy called Patrick Ferguson that protected his left flank going up the coast. Now Ferguson, he had sent a proclamation around to all the settlements in the frontier that he was going to burn, if they didn't leave, they was going to burn all their places out and their fields and their properties and hunt them down like traitors. Well, this didn't go over good with the mountain people, the over the mountain men and their families and their communities that they'd worked so hard and strove and fought for in these mountains. So they got together and they said they're going to pay this old Ferguson guy a visit. So all the militias got together out of Virginia, Tennessee, even out of Kentucky, South Carolina, and what's called Georgia. A William Campbell and a John Sevier gathered up all the militias they could out of these mountains, and they started their way to find this Ferguson guy. They worked their way across these mountains with all these militias. They gonna pay him a visit and put a stop to this. They wasn't gonna be run out of the country that they fought, struggled, and died for in these mountains. And what kind of weapons did they have back in them days? Just old flintlock muskets, most of them. They look like this. Old black powder, powder in a little pan there that would spark down with a piece of flint and ignite the ball in the barrel. But the Kentucky long rifle was the choice of these mountain men, and over the mountain men, it was just named the Kentucky long rifle because of the frontier, but it was made in Pennsylvania. Well, they finally figured out where he was, and they was going down to pay him a visit here in Kings Mountain. They come across these mountains by the hundreds, gathered up, and they finally caught up with him in this little place, just inside South Carolina. Here's a marker talking about it. And they caught up with him on October 7th, 1780. And he bragged up on this mountain that he was dug in to where nobody could take him off this mountain. He would never leave it, couldn't be forced off of it. Well, they found him, and they surrounded him in here. Here's the layout of the battlefield, and the people and the militias that's encircled him up on this mountain. Ferguson had 1,000 troops, British troops. And the militia was 1,800 strong. Now, they know that they couldn't take them on in an open battle, the British, in an open field. So they was going to use the Native American tactic, guerrilla warfare. So they encircled them in these woods and these mountains, and the fight was on. They finally got the best of them. They was hiding behind trees and everything. And Ferguson, late in the afternoon, got shot off of his horse. And he died. There's one thing for sure. He never left that mountain. He was right about that. Here's the monument to the battle site on Kings Mountain. So much history here. This is over the mountain men. It's a battlefield park just inside South Carolina. It's a nice place if you've never seen it. Well, after the war up on Kings Mountain, this was a decisive victory for the Patriots in defending this country. And Cornwallis later went to Yorktown and was surrounded and surrendered. That's the start of the nation. But the war really wasn't over at that time. They were still fighting the Native Americans that the British had against them. And just a couple of months after the Kings Mountain, John Sevier took his militia and went back towards Tennessee, and just in Sevier County outside of Knoxville, he fought the Indians. The Cherokee was uprising and attacking the settlements. And here's the battle site here on Boyd's Creek in Sevier County, where he took them on. But later on, after that was over, as time went on, they know they couldn't be protected and supported by North Carolina in this territory. So they tried to start their own state, the state of Franklin, in East Tennessee. Here's a marker commemorating all of it and the history of it. And they even tried to make their treaties with the Native Americans, Cherokee, down this Tennessee Valley here on Dumpling Creek. There's a marker commemorating that in Kodak, Tennessee. This was the only treaty that the state of Franklin, what time they was trying to exist, made. But like all treaties, they was always broken, one way or another, by greed from the white man. But anyway, this state almost become a state. It only lacked a few votes passing in Congress to become a state. But it only tried to make it for about 2 years, and it was just dissolved over time. But Tennessee became a state in 1776, and John Sevier became the second governor of the state. Kentucky had become, way before that, a few years, a state. Now these old mountains, they just hold so much history that you can only scratch the surface of what we know. And so many have died and fought trying to form this area and settle it over the years. If you just get off the beaten path and the back roads, you can see these markers everywhere. Even in these old graveyards. Here's a marker of a guy that fought with John Sevier at Kings Mountain and Boyd's Creek, fighting the Native Americans. So much history. These mountains, they hold a lot of secret and so much history that most people don't know about. So I'll just touch on a little bit of this. That was who and why they're called the Over the Mountain Men. They were part of these mountains, and when they was needed, they came over the mountains and done what they had to do And there you go. So I hope you enjoyed the story. God bless. Take care. And I'll see you next time.